Hey guys, a warm welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going through the full major service on my Ferrari 360 series. That will contain everything. We are going to be doing cam belts, tensioners, oil change, fluid change, filters, air filters, spark plugs, the full works. So I'll talk you through it on the video step by step. You guys grab yourself a cup of coffee, I'll go and get suited and booted, then you can sit back and hopefully enjoy the show. Let me quickly walk you through all of the items I've had to purchase to do the major. So over here, let's start over here. So I've got 1 litre of the Shell hydraulic fluid for our F1. Manual cars won't need that. I've then got 4 litres of Mobile 1 gearbox oil. I've got 10 litres of coolant. Got some power steering fluid. I've got my Dot 4 brake fluid. I've got 10 litres of 5W40 Shell Ferrari endorsed engine oil. Over here we have a service kit, so they all came together along with the washers. So we'll go through those. That was our oil filter, spark plugs, copper washers, like I say, cabin air filter, and our 2 normal air filters in the engine bay. That came as a kit. Price was this. Then moving on, we have our 3 auxiliary belts over here to change. We then have our cam belts, and I've got upgraded Hill Engineering tensioners. On top of that, I have also purchased some cam cover gaskets, and that is because when I change the cam belts, I want to be 100% sure of our timing marks, so I'll be taking the covers off to check that. And that is all the items to do our major. So a little bit about this Ferrari 360 of mine for those of you who've just stumbled upon the video and not yet a subscriber to the channel. This has been my daily driver for over 9 years now. It is a Challenge Stradale version, but the 360s are all very, very similar when it comes to servicing. This one has been used, enjoyed and driven probably more than 99% of other 360s or Ferraris out there. As you'll see when we go around it on the video, you know, it is not a garage queen. It really does wear the battle scars, and it really is driven daily. So if you haven't seen the other videos on this, there's plenty more on my channel, so check them out. So before I can start the service work on the Ferrari 360, I need to remove various panels. So I'm going to be removing the under tray. I'm also going to be going inside the car to remove the seats and the access panel to enable me to work on things like the cam belts, the auxiliary belts, and obviously underneath the car doing all the oil draining and stuff like that. So I'm going to move the car out. We're going to start by getting the seats out of the car. Let me just run through the tools we need for the job. So from left to right, we've got some penetrating fluid, always handy. Socket set with a small extension bar, a long extension bar. I've got 10, 12, 13 mil spanners. 17 and 19 are always handy as well as a backup. I have got some hex sockets, or you could probably get away with just a good set of Allen keys. Here I've got a small socket set, mainly 13 and 10 from the top of my head, and a little extension bar on that is quite handy. The specific key tools for this are these two, and I'll show you those. So this is our locking device for the crankshaft. Again, at the end of the video, I'll show you how you could possibly make one of those yourself, free of charge. This is our cam tensioner bearing little device, our tool for tightening that up. I think a VW one might work with this, but you might need to just grind out the cutout there so you can get your 13mm socket on if you get a VW one. I have got a tensioner bearing lock pin. You could use a drill bit for that, but these are very cheap, so I will put a link again to all of these specific tools in the video comments below. I've got a breaker bar here. Very important is the torque wrench. It's a 36mm short socket, which is this one. Again, very important you have a short socket, and I'll put that in the video as well. Phillips screwdriver, 2 vice grips, that's for our cams. We've got a 10mm spark plug socket here for the 360, and these, they're not essential, but I use these. These are very handy for putting the cam belts and holding them in place if you're doing the job on your own. And that's it. Okay, so we're going to start off inside the car and we're going to remove the seats. To do that, 4 bolts, very simple. There's 2 at the back, 1 down here, 1 on the opposite side over there. Then you move, so that's the seat fully forward, seat fully back, 2 more, 1 here, 1 on the other side over there on the other rail, and that's just simply bolts like this. So you just need an Allen key to remove those, and that's just a slow process because there's not much access. Mine are obviously race seats, and I've got the race harnesses on mine, so I'll show you just how to disconnect those as well. So we simply slide this up through here, take it out. This little bit in the middle has a slight bit of movement, so you can get this through it. That just slides through here. And that's the race seats done. If you've got electric seats, you are going to need to move them forward and backwards. Same process to move the 4 bolts. All the seats have got just 4 bolts. And then the only other thing you're going to need to do on the race seats is disconnect the electrical harness underneath. Okay, that's the first seat out. You're going to repeat the process on the other side and gain access to this back panel. And that's the second seat out of the car. So next we are going to remove the back panel in here. So first of all, we're going to remove the cargo nets. That's just 2 screws here and here. Same on that one. And then once you've unscrewed it, it just clips out of these clips here and down here. Okay, so that's 1. The other one's done over there as well. Then we're going to remove the access covers here. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws on those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's my 1 there. We're going to remove this one as well. Okay, next you should be able to, I have obviously the roll bar in my car, so I've had to take out a couple of bolts. That's quite a rare option, but yeah. Next we need to remove the carpet here, and we simply should just be able to pull that out. Now we've got all the panels removed here. I've got the bolts out of my roll bar, so I can move that. And now we're going to remove this. And that's our rear carpeting removed. We're now going to go back into the car and remove all the bolts for the rear access panel. That's our rear access panel. So we are going to remove all of the 12 bolts around the outside. And there you go, that's the 12 bolts removed, so we're ready to remove the access panel now. It simply comes off like this. Put that down there. So now we have access to our engine bay, and we can do our cam belts. We've got to get all the covers off, all the other belts on first. We've got a nice little bit of access there to change all those belts over. So I'm now going to move the car back into the garage because I want to keep it all dry. I need to get the under tray off the car, and then we'll carry on. 360's now in the garage. I've got the back bumper off. You don't need to do this. This is for me. This makes it easier for me to film, and I already had it off anyway for the actuator, so it wasn't even bolted into place. So next we have got the under tray off the car already. I'm not going to film that. It's quite difficult under there to do it. Obviously I have no industrial ramps, so that's very simple though. It's just loads of 10mm bolts, lots of them, and that's all of them down there. So we're going to do the cam belts in my garage with the car, simply on axle stands, so no professional ramp or anything like that. So first thing you want to do is kill the battery. So we do that from the front trunk. Light just went out there, so I know that's dead. So while we've got the panel off, let's just identify the 3 belts. So we've got one here at the front, wraps around the pulley down here through the alternator. So that is going to be our this one. Okay. Also alternator belt. Second one is a small belt here, and that is going to be for our power steering, which is this one up the top. Comes up around here on this one, so we're going to replace that. And finally is our compressor belt, which is going to be this one down here, comes up and around the back of this pulley. Okay, so that's our 3 belts. So first I'm going to remove the alternator / water belt here at the front, the big one. To do that, we've got a 12mm nut here on the front, which I've loosened, and then underneath, I need to go underneath the car, there's another tensioning bolt that I need to loosen off, take the slack off this, and then we can remove the belt. So we're underneath the car now. You can see the belt here for the alternator, wrap around the alternator, and we need to loosen off this 19mm bolt here. I've just sprayed it with some WD-40 just to loosen it all off, and yeah, so I'm going to just loosen that and then we can remove the belt. Okay, so as you can see, that is now super loose, so I'm just going to slide the belt off. Voila. And that is one belt. I'm just going to tighten that bolt up by hand a little bit so we don't lose it for now. Keep it all together. Right, okay, so next I'm going to take off the cover. To remove this is 4 Allen bolts, so 1, 2, 3, and the last one down here. And I am just using an Allen key for this because I can't find my other tool. Old school. Okay, ready. Now these are different lengths, so just make sure you use the right ones, the long ones down the bottom. Okay, ready? And that is my belts. So next I'm going to remove the other cover. Before I do that, I'm just going to take the clamp off of this coolant pipe down here. Just so I can remove this around a bit, so I can take that off and just keep the coolant in the pipe for the time being. Okay, next I'm going to remove this absorber block here, and that looks like 2 10mm bolts. So that's out like that. That's the part that came off. That's the absorber. So we had a long one on that side and a short 10mm on the right side. It sits on the car kind of like this. Here's the car. Okay, so that is the other cover off. So it's a case of removing the bracket on the bottom of this, the little clamp, the absorber down here with the 2 10mm, then a little bit of a wiggle between the pipes here, but not too bad, not too bad. So there's my belts, there's my old belts, old tensioners. Got a bit of movement in that belt. That one over there, a bit better. Okay, so let's move on to the next step. Let me quickly run through the layout here on the Ferrari 360 engine for those of you who are new to this or a little bit unsure. Up the top here we have our intake cam. This is for cylinders 1 to 4. Our exhaust cam for cylinders 1 to 4. On the opposite bank over here we have our intake cam for 5 to 8 cylinders, exhaust cam for 5 to 8 cylinders. We have our tensioner bearing on both banks there, so 2 of those, and our hydraulic tensioners, 1 of each for each of the 2 banks. And the other part we have in our cam timing belt system is down the bottom here, and that is our drive pulleys. So 1 for this bank, 1 for the 5 to 8 bank. And that is all the stuff we are going to be working on today to change our cam belts. The next belt we're going to remove is the AC belt down here. To do that we need to go underneath the car. It's a similar process to the removal of the alternator belt over here on the other side. We need to go underneath and loosen off some of the adjusters. We are back under the car again, and we are going to be removing this AC belt. To do that, first of all we need to undo this 10mm nut here, take the tension off, or the tensioner, pull the tensioner away from the belt. Then we're going to come up here, loosen off this 13mm nut on the pulley itself, and then back under here, and with this one here, we're going to take the tension off of the pulley, and then we should be able to remove the belt. So first let's loosen off that 10mm. Okay, just loosen it slightly, and as you can see the tensioner has just come loose off the belt here. Then we're going to take a 12mm, sorry, correction, it's a 12mm, not a 13mm, and I'm going to loosen the nut on the pulley. There we go, 12mm. Let's just do that again a little bit more. Okay, that's enough. Okay, just slide that belt off. And there we go. Round there, round there. 1 belt. There we go, so our power steering belt, that's over there. So that's both the auxiliary belts off that we needed to remove. The next task we need to do is remove this big crankshaft pulley at the front here. The reason we need to remove this is if you look at our layout of the cam timing belt here, it goes around these driving pulleys for banks 1 to 4 and 5 to 8 over here. And there is no way of removing the belt because the crankshaft pulley is in the way. You could obviously cut it, but you'd never get a new one on. So we are going to go through step by step how to remove that. Now we're at the back of the car, and we're going to remove this inspection cover here. To do that, it's a 2.5mm Allen bolt, I believe. 4 of them. Now we need to rotate the engine using the big nut down here on the crankshaft pulley. Now you need ideally to have a 36mm shallow socket like this. The reason you need a shallow socket is because if you look here, there's not much room to get the socket on the pulley and also your breaker bar in that gap here. Okay, so we're gonna go underneath the car, put our socket on, put our breaker bar on, and rotate the engine. So I'm gonna move that crankshaft pulley in a clockwise motion, and you should see this rotate. So from under the car we got our short 36mm socket on, our breaker bar, and as you can see, you can just turn that over now. There we go, ready? And clockwise. You can see that rotate. I want to get that central. There we go. To lock the crankshaft rotation, I have this special tool. This is the Ferrari AV3207 tool. Basically it sits in the recess, I will show you, and just stops rotation completely. There are other ways of doing this. There's cheaper ways. You can put the car in gear, 6th gear, have someone stand and hold the brake while you loosen off the nut on that crankshaft pulley. Others simply use some kind of pry bar or something like that, long screwdriver, and lock it in here. Get someone to lock it in here while they loosen off the nut. People make their own little device that looks similar to this. I've paid about 150 to £200 for this, just to do it correctly, the Ferrari way. Join me towards the end of the video and I'll show you how you can make one of these very easily and very cheaply at home yourself. So now that we have rotated the crankshaft and got this void in the clutch plate centered in our access panel here, I'm going to take the tool, and this part of the tool simply sits in that void, and I will then screw in these into the holes where our 2.5mm hex bolts came out. As you can see, that's all screwed in place now, so that is completely locked all rotation of our crankshaft. So we're going to go back to the other end and we're going to try and get that 36mm bolt out of the pulley. Okay, so I've used my breaker bar and my short 36mm socket, and I've managed to loosen that off, and at the moment you can see I'm able to unscrew that with just my fingers. See where we go, but we might also need a 36mm open-ended spanner just for that last bit. Again, it depends on access here. As you can see, that bolt is out now. That wasn't too bad at all. Okay, so with my short socket, that came off no problem at all. I had lots of access down there. So my short socket is about 5 centimeters deep completely. Like I say, that gave me lots of access and I was quite easily able to remove that bolt. Now we're ready and in a position to remove the crankshaft pulley itself. These can get a little stuck. I did put a little bit of penetrating fluid earlier in there, and you can see mine just slides off nicely. There we go. So that's the pulley off. Now that we have the pulley removed from the car, I need to put a spacer back on the shaft. I don't actually have a spacer big enough with this diameter, so this is going to be another one of my improvisation videos. I've got some tubing here. It's about the same diameter, pretty much the same. I'm going to measure how deep this is, which is about 4 centimeters exactly. There you go, you can see that, 4 centimeters. So I'm going to measure my tube. I'm going to cut off 4 centimeters here. I'm going to see if that works in place. 4 centimeters exactly here. Cut a mark. Cut that off. Okay, so let's test it. Oh yeah, look at that, like a glove. Okay, so I'm just going to put my bolt back in. I'm not gonna, it doesn't need to be torqued up, it just needs to be tight enough. And there you go, that's all in place, totally solid, it's not going anywhere. Cheap bit of household goods, improvisation. Now we're ready to remove our crankshaft locking tool again. So I'll just take out the 4 pins and drop that away from the car. Okay, that's done. So our engine is again free to rotate. Next, I'm going to remove all the spark plugs. If you're just doing cam belts, you could get away with only removing spark plug from cylinder 1 here. The reason we're removing them is to find top dead center. I'm going to remove all 8 anyway because it's easier to rotate the engine, and I'm going to be replacing all 8 of them as part of the major service, which will be in part 3 of the video. If you just remove spark plug number 1, it's just going to be a bit more harder to rotate the crankshaft. To remove the plugs on the Ferrari 360, first of all we need to remove the 2 10mm bolts holding the coil pack in place. One there, and one on the other side over here. There we go. With the 2 10mm bolts removed, you should simply be able to just pull that coil pack off. I'm just going to leave that hanging down there, and then we need to get our plug socket and remove the plug. The nice thing about these coil packs is they've got a little collar on here, so they're all numbered. So that's number 1, 2, 3, 4, so you can't get them mixed up when you go to reassemble. To remove the spark plugs on a 360, I use my spark plug socket and a short extension bar, and the reason for that is down here there is not a lot of room. With a long extension bar, when you got the socket in, you're pretty much hitting this, so short extension bar works perfectly. The plugs on the 360 are quite slim. They're a 10mm socket. That's our first plug out, so I'm going to go ahead and repeat the process for all 8. During the cam belt, timing belt change on a Ferrari 360, you need to bring the engine up to top dead center. In order to do that, you need to know your cylinder layout on the engine block. So I'll give you a quick overview of the Ferrari 360. So it's a V8 engine, 4 cylinders on this side, 4 cylinders on the opposite side. The cylinder numbering goes like this. Number 1 cylinder is at the front here, nearest the cabin. Number 2, number 3, number 4 cylinder is nearest the back of the car. We go around to the opposite side, and it goes number 5 over here, back of the car. 6, 7, and number 8 cylinder is on this side, closest to the front of the car, or the cabin of the car. Next, we need to bring cylinder number 1 up to top dead center on the compression stroke. The official way of doing that is to use a dial indicator with an extension that screws into the 10mm spark plug socket. You would then turn over the engine, and as it hits top dead center, your indicator will go to its highest point and then start dropping back down again. I'm not going to do that. This is a DIY video, so I'm going to use a chopstick. We are going to put that into cylinder number 1. I'll turn over the engine by hand, and we will watch this as it comes out on the compression stroke. On the highest point of the compression stroke, that is top dead center. That is where we need to be. next we're ready to remove the camshaft rear cover, the rear here. So we've got 4mm hex and some 10mm nuts on here. This will give us access to the timing marks on the shafts. Apologies, that is a 5mm hex, not a 4mm hex in that end plate, and 10mm nuts. Okay, so that is our end plate removed. So that was a combination of 10mm nuts and 5mm hex. So that is our plate removed, and so we're going to be looking at timing marks on the shaft. So let me zoom in, and this is what we're looking for. So this is our top cam, so this is our intake cam. You can see the line here at the back, and you can look on the shaft itself. There's a line there, and they perfectly align, so that is great news. And this is our exhaust cam, and the same again, perfect alignment with both marks. So again, great news. So just to confirm, our timing marks perfectly align on the rear of the shafts there, camshafts. So we need to go into the car, and what we're hoping to see now is the factory timing marks on the pulleys, which you can see here in yellow. They align nicely. There's one down there as well on the crank, so that's aligned. So that's really good news. So everything is factory on this side. Again over there, we're all good. I just need to check the rear shaft alignment marks for the other bank. So I'm going to repeat the process and remove the cover on this side of the engine. And that's our second cover removed. So we're ready to check the timing marks on these cams. There we go, that's our top cam. You can clearly see that's timed up perfectly. Let's get to the bottom one. And that one is our bottom one. Much more difficult to see on the bottom one. Checking the alignment of those timing marks on those camshafts is very difficult. With the naked eye and the engine in the car, it's virtually impossible. In method number one, I used the iPhone with a light on it and recorded. Coming down here, you can see the screen, you can see the marks, but it's not 100% perfect. Sometimes I'm not sure if there's a bit of a glare there. So I like to use one of these. This is a very cheap £15 scope. It works with most devices, iPads, tablets, phones. I'll put a link to the description below where you can buy one of these, and there's more about this in part 3 of the video where I'll be using it again. But with our scope, I can get down here, and on the scope you can see it's got little LED lights. We can get down here, and on the shaft and on the picture here, it's upside down, the camera's upside down. Turn it around the other way, there we go. So what I'm looking for here is this mark here. This is the critical mark aligning here with the shaft, and I can take a picture on my screen, and that is the way I do it. 100% sure then, 100% accurate, and I'll do the same with the other 4 marks. So the engine is all timed up. We've got our markings on our inlet and our exhaust cams. We've got our marking down on the crankshaft as well. What I'm going to do though is I'm also going to put a mark on these left and right drive pulleys at the bottom here. There we go. I'm going to just mark these up against the engine block, just so I've got everything timed up in case anything slips during the operation of changing these belts over. So a little dot of my daughter's bright pink nail varnish should do the trick. I'll put a marking on the block and on my drive pulley. The same again over here. too much. There we go. Let that dry. At this point, we are almost ready to change our cam belts, our timing belts, and our tensioner bearings. What I like to do here is, before doing that, I like to take a reading of our gap here on the tensioner, down here, this gap between the collar here and the body. That should read somewhere between 1.9 and 2.3 millimeters. I can tell you on mine, it's more like 2.6, 2.7. So, like I say, maximum it should be is 2.3. Tells me that my tensioner has extended more, which indicates that my belt is quite stretched. So, definitely a good thing for me at this point to be changing these belts and the bearing itself. Now, you would normally take this reading after you've changed the belt, so we'll do that again the correct way, and we will check how far that gap is, and hopefully that brings it back down into spec. What I do need to do, the problem I have now is, I don't know if you can see it, and I'll do a zoom in here as well. There is a small hole here on the tensioner bearing, and you would take a clip. This is just an Allen key. You need a special pin ideally, but I'm going to improvise for the sake of this video. I'll show you the correct pin you would normally use. I'm doing this and showing you the cheap way of doing a cam belt service as well. So you would normally place your tensioner pin in here, and it would go through the shaft, and it would lock this tensioner all into place so it can't extend. So when I take the belt off, this thing is not going to, the spring tension is not going to spring this completely out. So my dilemma now is I cannot lock that in place, so I'm going to have to try and pivot this tensioner back in a little bit and put my pin in place before I move everything. So I'm going to go ahead and try and do that. And this is what an official tensioner pin looks like. I have a selection here. I bought these for a few pounds, and I'll put a link where you can buy these in the comments below the video. Obviously you want to use the biggest pin that you can get in the hole, just for rigidity. In the video I'll use one of these just to show you the absolute DIY version of doing your belts. This is just an Allen key. Again, it's the biggest one I could get through the slot, and what you need to do is make sure you've got something that's quite strong. For instance, something like a paper clip won't work, it will just bend it straight away. There's a lot of tension on that pin in the tensioner. Other people use something like a drill bit. Okay, so I'll use this for the video, but ideally for a few pounds, get yourself a correct pin. Just a quick note to say that when I did measure my gap here with the feeler gauge for the tensioner, my gap was too big. Because of that, I couldn't get the locking pin in place. So what I will do is I'll put at the end of the video what I did to combat that and be able to get my locking pin in the tensioner. I'm not going to put it here because it will confuse matters. I'll put it at the end of the video in the extra section. So we're now ready to start the removal process. Car is all at top dead center. All our timing marks line up on both banks. Down on the crank, I've made my marks here on the drive pulleys as well, just to be 100% sure. So first of all, we will take our pin for our tensioner. Mine is a small thin Allen key. It's not the most ideal. I will show you the correct tool you need to use. We put it in to the hole, slide that in all the way so that locks our tensioner. Then we are going to lock our cams in place with some vice grips, some mole grips. Believe it or not, this is the official way of doing it with Ferrari. It's in the workshop manual. So we're going to lock our intake and exhaust cams together so they can't move. I'll play it safe. I'll do the same on the other side as well. And then we're ready for the next step. Okay, so that's my vice grips on both. In theory, I should not need that because I've got the belt and we're doing one belt at a time. But I like to be triply sure nothing's going to move. So let's start with the belt. And now finally, we are ready to replace our belt and our tensioner bearing. Everything is in place. Our vice grips are gripping everything together. We've got our lock pin in the tensioner. Everything is marked up. So I am going to remove this 17mm bolt. I'm going to loosen it first and we'll remove our belt. Okay, and you can see our bearing there has become nice and loose. And we should be able to actually now slip our belt off of the teeth. And there we go. That is one old cam belt. We'll have an inspection of that in a little bit. So I'll grab a new one. I'll grab our bearing and we will start to change those over. Let's just remove the rest of the bearing. So I'll just take this 17mm bolt all the way out there. As you can see, just spun that around. So there we go. That's our bearing out. Our bolt. So we're ready to replace that as well. Okay, and that's our replacement belt, our new belt, our new Hills tensioner. Let's remove that. So there you go, old one, new one, nice and shiny. Okay, big difference there. So let's install our new one quickly. I'm just going to put it in place loosely and then put the belt in. Just going to screw that there on this tensioner mount. Nice and loose. And we're going to put our belt in place. Now, let's see how easy this is today. These are normally very tricky. All right, so I'm going to go over my drive one. Let's see if we can do anything here. Right, I'm just going to grab something quickly. Okay, so I've started to put my belt onto the teeth. I'm going to use a little clamp here just to help it hold it for a little bit. You need a few sets of hands to do this. It's over there. And let's see. Okay, a little bit tricky. Let's try again. Couple of tips for you. So as you saw, I've got some of these. These really help. I'm doing all this with myself with no assistance from anyone else, just so you can know it's a one-man job. So I've got a clamp down there on the drive pulley, one on each of the exhaust and intake cams, just holding the belt just on the edge of the teeth here. I've got the nut quite loose on the tensioner bearing, so this is right up in its most slack position, and I just about managed to get the belt over here and started to get it back on the teeth over here, so you can just see that. So I'm going to start sliding that on in place, and you can just see they're going on. There we go. It's on down here on our drive pulley. Take that clamp off there. I can push it in place over here. And there we go. That is our first belt in place and ready to be tensioned up. Being as this is the main part of the show, changing the cam belt, the timing belt and the tensioner bearing. Let's have another close-up. So we're down, we're on our intake and exhaust cams in the teeth nicely, down on the teeth again on our drive pulley down there. All our timing marks line up nicely underneath our tensioner bearing. So the next part we're going to do is we're going to adjust the bearing. The idea is we take our tool here, which is just on my ratchet. We're going to put it in here. We're going to turn it clockwise. That will adjust it, and we want to adjust it so we can move in and out our little pin here holding our tensioner. So when that moves in and out freely, it should be, in theory, around about the right tension. Okay, so what we're not going to do is remove this. We're going to adjust it, test this so we can move it in and out freely, and then tighten up our bolt. Okay, we've got my tool in place on the tensioner bearing now. I'm applying tension, and as you can see, I can clearly move that pin in and out. So I'm going to nip up a 17mm bolt. Test that again. Okay, so I can move it in and out. Just going to nip that up a little bit more. Something to note again, when you're trying to tighten up the 17mm, even when you have your tool in place, holding that in place, it's very difficult because when you're tightening it, it's moving this tensioner and closing the gap here, which obviously is changing our pin alignment. So it is a little bit of trial and error. You have to do it a few times. I'm quite happy with that at the moment, but obviously this is not to torque spec. So anyway, I'm going to rotate the engine. We'll see how we get on. Just to say, don't worry if you get this wrong first time. It takes a bit of practice. It's a bit better now. As long as your pin's in here, you can just keep adjusting it, and everything's in place now, so it's not an issue. So next what we need to do, so my pin can freely move. That's good. In and out all the way. So we're going to check the gap again down here. I'll do a close-up of this, but we want to check that it is between 1.9 and 2.3 millimeters. So finally now, I'm happy with this cam belt. I'm going to rotate the engine. My pin slides in and out freely. You leave the pin in for this. So I'm going to rotate the engine 2 revolutions clockwise. So that's 2 revolutions of the engine complete. All our timing marks line up perfectly, so I'm very happy with that. We've left the belt now for 2 minutes just to let that settle down. A couple of checks now. First of all is that our pin can still slide in and out freely, and that's absolutely perfect. Number 2, we're going to check the gap here again on our tensioner between the body and the little collar here. So that needs to, again, reminder is 1.9 to 2.3 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. If that's all right, I will then torque up the 17mm bolt there to spec. I've used my feeler gauge and checked the gap. That is perfectly within spec. Also, my pin slides out absolutely peachy, so I am really happy with that. Now I'm going to torque up the 17mm bolt here to 49 Newton meters. Perfect. Just take our pin out now. Slides in and out nicely. So I am 100% happy with that. That slide's come out great. Now that we have our new tensioner bearing and timing belt in place, next we need to make sure that the tension on the belt is within tolerance. Now, Ferrari use a special tool called a harmonic tension tool, which basically measures frequencies. And the way they do it is they strum the belt in various places, they measure the frequency and they make a calculation, and if the frequency is correct, basically it means the belt is tensioned up to the right spec. Okay, we've already applied pre-tension to the belt using our special tool within the tensioner bearing and our pin in the tensioner. So now we're going to go ahead and measure the frequency of the belt. Now, the special tool that Ferrari use is quite expensive. It looks something like this, and most people won't have access to one of those. So I'm going to use something and show you the DIY version by using a simple app. There's free apps. This one cost a few dollars from the App Store. On my iPhone, I'm going to use the iPhone's microphone, which will basically measure frequencies pretty much in the same way as the Ferrari tool. So I'll show you how I go about doing that on the 360. Alright, let me try and explain how this process works. So we are going to tension up my left side belt here. In order to do that, number one, we need to turn over the engine at least twice. I like to do it about 4 times, just to make sure we've got even tension around the belt on our new fresh belt. Then we need to take 2 frequency readings in 2 parts of the belt. So number one, we take a reading on our long expanse down here at the midway point, so here, and then we take our second reading between our tensioner bearing and our drive pulley here, again at the midway point. Now, the way we can do this is, we don't have the Ferrari tool, but as I showed you, there are some free tools available on the App Store or the Play Store. So this is the latest one. So I've been trialing a few of them. This one is made by a company called Gates. Now, it's very simple to use. It's a free download. If you've not heard of Gates, Gates are a huge belt manufacturer. This is a Gates belt. This Gates belt came from my Ferrari specialist parts supplier when I ordered up my service kit for the car. This is the compressor belt, and unbeknownst to me, it's made by Gates. So Gates put out the free app. Gates is huge in the belt industry. If they are happy that this works with their belts, then I am happy that this is good enough to get a close enough reading on my Ferrari cam belts. So let me show you how it works. So we use our microphone from the smartphone. It needs to be a few centimeters away from the belt. I will then strum the belt in the right place. .66, and I do that, and I take that reading 3 or 4 times until I'm happy that that is definitely a consistent reading. I then take my second reading over here, again trying to only pluck the belt and not touch anything else. And that's 106. Sorry, that's upside down. 106. It resets, like I say, every few seconds. 107. So I would add those two together, so that that's about 170, 180 at the moment. My tolerance for the cam belts is between 190 and 220, so that tells me that I need to tighten up my belts slightly to bring it within range. So the higher the frequency, the tighter the belt. Obviously, if I'm over the 220, I would need to loosen off my tensioner and just loosen off the tension on the belt. And that is it. That's how it works. Hopefully that explains it. It's simple enough. It's the same process on the power steering belt, the alternator belt, the water pump, everything like that is the same way you tension up the belts on the 360 during the service. So it's all done with a frequency reader. Okay, so any questions, give me a comment below and I'll try and answer them. So now I'm going to simply repeat that process on the other bank and replace the belt and tensioner. But before I do that, let's have a quick look at those old parts that came off the car and compare them with the new ones. Okay, so let's have a look at the old belt. So exterior, just see a bit of wear on it. Interior. A little bit of cracking, but you're not going to see too much with the naked eye on one of these. And then let's see if I can give you any kind of indication on lengthwise. It's impossible really to be 100% sure on the stretch, but it does feel like it's very slightly longer on the old one now. Let's compare the bearings. So this is the Hill Engineering one, really well made, lovely smooth bearing there. And then this one is the old one. As you can see, it's got a bit rusty, a bit dirty, especially on the inside there. But to be fair, bearing wise, it feels okay. That's been on the car a few years, and it's done a fair few miles, that one. That is our timing belts now complete. Everything is within tolerance. The frequencies are all good. I've turned the car over again and double checked it. Next we are going to change the power steering belt, and then we are starting to put everything back together. So for our power steering belt, first of all we're going to loosen number 1 and number 2 back there. They are 6mm hex. Then we're going to take a 10mm spanner and adjust our nut here, which takes the tension off the belt. So I'm going to do that. Put my ratchet spanner on here. This is loosening the belt. Okay, let's just check. Can we get that off now? Yep, there we go. So that's our power steering belt. Just going to replace that. Okay, so I've replaced the belt. I'm just tightening it up with my 10mm spanner. Now, a very important note. The workshop manual on the Ferrari 360 is wrong. So again, like I said earlier, we measure the tension on this by using our frequency meter. In the 360, the standard 360 workshop manual, it says something, I think off the top of my head, somewhere between 90 and 100 hertz. It needs to actually be somewhere between 267 and 275. So you go by the 360 Challenge Stradale service manual, and that is the correct spec. So I'm gonna finish tightening this up, do our frequency, and then nip up the 2.6mm hexes to torque spec. Okay, so I've nipped it up very slightly. I've let it settle for a couple of minutes again. I've spun it around. 271, 271.8, 271.7, 271.1, 271.6. So that is perfectly bang in the middle of our range, 267 to 275. Totally happy with that. So I'm just going to nip these up to 25 Newton meters, these two 6mm hex, and that is the power steering pump done. Now I'm ready to replace my rear engine covers with a couple of new gaskets. So I'm going to put those in place, and that's both our covers installed with new gaskets. Next we're going to put our new spark plugs in. They should be pre-gapped, but just for reference they need to be between 0.024 and 0.028 of an inch on the gap, and we're going to torque those up to 9.8 Newton meters. Next we're going to remove the spacer, reinstall our pulley. So first of all I need to reinsert my lock tool in place. So our lock tool's in place. Just remove the 36mm nut, our spacer, our homemade spacer. I'm going to reinstall the pulley. So that's our spacer removed. I'm just going to put a bit of Loctite on the thread on our 36mm bolt, and then that needs to be torqued up to 196 Newton meters, so extremely tight. Jeez, that's tight. There we go. That's 196. Now I'm ready to remove my lock tool and reinstall my flywheel inspection cover. And that's nicely back in place. So we're nearly there. We've got a couple of things to do. We need to put the black covers over the timing belts here and our alternator belt plus our AC belt. But before I do that, I'm going to have a quick visual check. So we're going to try and fire the car over and see and check that everything sounds and looks hunky-dory. So keep those fingers crossed. Keys in the ignition. Here we go. Happy days! Looks good, sounds good. I'm going to turn it off now. So everything looks okay. I'm going to carry on, replace the covers, and then we need to go through a test cycle with the engine. Now that I'm happy, everything turns over, sounds all good. I'm going to replace the timing belt covers. So the 5mm hex screws, they need to be to 9.8 Newton meters. Covers are now both back in place, so just 2 more belts to go. So we got our AC belt over here, and then finally our alternator belt. So I'm going to start just by routing it around the pulleys in place, then go under the car and start tensioning that up. I'm under the car now. I'm just making final adjustments on our AC belt by tightening up the 10mm bolt here. I'm then going to do the frequency test on the belt, which needs to be between 156 and 164 hertz. I'll tighten up the 12mm nut up here on the pulley, and then finally this bearing that just needs to ride on the belt here, I'll tighten that up so it just kisses the belt, rides on that, and then we'll just tighten that 10mm nut up finally. And now we're ready to install our final belt, so the alternator and water pump belt. So I'm going to put that in place, get back under the car and start tensioning it up. So our belt's all in place. I've got the pulley just nipped up so it's not fully loose. I am now just adjusting the belt, and I'm actually within spec. Remember, the adjustment goes the opposite way, so it's not to tighten up, it's going that way to tighten it. So I just need to go in the car and check the frequency. The frequency on this needs to be between 116 and 124 hertz. So to get our frequency on the belt, we need to strum it between the alternator and the top pulley at the midpoint here. So I'm just going to do that. So I've got my frequency all set up correctly, so I just need to now tighten up the 12mm nut on the pulley, and again just position our roller bearing over here and tighten it up so it's just kissing the belt. And that's pretty much everything done. I'm going to fire over the engine. I'm just going to take another reading after it's done a few revolutions of the belts again, just to be 100% sure, making the adjustments if I need to. We're going to pop out for a little drive in the car. Race mode, of course. that is it, guys. That is the full step-by-step DIY process for doing a cam belt service on a Ferrari 360. Car is now outside. I'm going to be putting back on the bumpers, under trays, put the seats in, put the rear carpet in and the panel in there, take it for a drive down the road, make sure I'm happy with everything, button everything up, but job is done. So that, don't forget, is part of the major service on my Ferrari 360. Part 2 will be the engine and gearbox oil change. Part 3 will be all the other stuff, fluid changes, brakes, filters, everything like that. So 3-part series on this major service. Don't forget to tune in on those. Hopefully you found this one useful. If you did, give me a thumbs up, give me a like, make sure you share it amongst the Ferrari community, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao. Okay, I'll quickly show you how you could make a cheap homemade version of this tool. So you would take a piece of metal, yeah, quite thick. Obviously I've knocked this one up in cardboard, but you can see the thickness of this, which is, if I give you a measurement for rigidity, it's roughly around 10 mil. So we'll take a nice bit of metal, thick, 76 mil on the short edge, 158 mil on the long edge. Again, there's some movement in that. You'd need 4 holes in the corner, and ideally they're slots, so you've got a bit of movement there. Then what you would do is you would take a couple of bolts, one there, one here, put it through our metal, put a nut on the other side, keep that nice and sturdy. So they are then protruding through. You would bolt this onto the car in the same way you've done with this, and that would lock everything in place. Let's go and show you on the car. Let me just show you the depth of that. So the depth of that is about 36 mil. It needs to go into the car from the bottom of this. So, but you can play around with that. There's probably a bit of movement. Okay, so with our homemade tool, I don't have the recess here because the car's all lined up now, but let's say our recess was here. That would just go in there. You'd bolt that up. You'd have the 2 bolts in the recess, and that would lock it in place. Let's take a quick look at what we're trying to do with the hydraulic tensioner. This is our tensioner. This is the face you would see from inside the car when you're doing the cam belt job. So you'd normally put your pin through this hole. You see that there? We go. It would go through this hole, then it would go through the one in the shaft here. Now our shaft has come all the way out, and this is what we're trying to stop happening in the car. So it would go through here, through our shaft, and then through the hole on the other side here, okay? So my shaft has come out on this one. I'm gonna go and compress this. I've taken the tension out of the car. It's just 2 13 mil bolts. I'm gonna go and put this in a vise. I'm gonna compress this slowly, and then I'm gonna put my pin back through it, put it back in the car and start again. So as you can see, that is now compressed again. The pin is all the way through the shaft, through the body. So I'm going to put that back in.